You need something that you're going to argue, something that you think is true. Those are the types of support you can use. You can use reasons, you can use facts, you can use data, statistics, you can use examples, you can use expert opinions. Okay, those are all different types of support. You can use logic. Okay, and any of those, whichever one you think is best to persuade your audience to show that your claim is true, that's the support you should use. When you take this together, you have an argument. The claim plus the support is an argument. Okay, this is the technical term of argument. This is kind of the academic way of talking about it. I could say, I had an argument with my son yesterday, but an argument is when I make a claim, I say something about the world, and then I give support, and then I hope that you agree with me. I hope I have persuaded you and changed your mind. Okay, this is claim and support that make an argument. However, in a debate, you have more than one person making claims. So you might have a claim, you might have support, but you might also have a counterclaim. A counterclaim is an opposing statement about the world. Okay, an opposing statement about the world. So, for example, if my claim is, I believe that the death penalty should be abolished. Okay, that's my claim. The death penalty is wrong and it should be abolished. Counterclaim might be, I think the death penalty is a useful tool for governments to use. Okay, so now we have two claims, and both claims need support. And the person who brings together the best support is going to win the debate. All right. Now, another way that you can answer somebody's claim is, instead of making a counterclaim, you can refute their claim. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about refuting an opinion or refuting a claim. A counterclaim means making a new statement, a different statement. All right, so if I say the death penalty is morally wrong, then you might say, well, the death penalty convinces people not to do certain kinds of crimes. Okay, so instead of saying the death penalty, I say the death penalty is wrong, and you say the death penalty is not wrong, not morally wrong. That would be a refutation. No, that's not true, is a refutation. A counterclaim is giving a different idea instead. Okay? So if I say the death penalty is wrong, it's ethically wrong, and you answer, well, it's so expensive to keep a prisoner alive in prison for their whole life until they die of old age. I'm arguing about morals, and you're arguing about the cost to taxpayers. Okay, that's a different kind of claim, a different kind of statement about the world. Where a refutation is, okay, if your claim is, well, keeping a prisoner in prison until they die of old age is very expensive, well, my refutation might be, well, the lawyer fees it costs more for your legal team to push for a death penalty because the standard is much higher to try and get the death penalty in a crime. So, because the death penalty is a pretty extreme step. So, the lawyer fees and the court costs to process a capital crime, a death penalty crime, are so high that it might even be higher than just keeping a prisoner in prison for their entire life. And if you look at all of those numbers together, we could measure the cost of pushing that court case against the cost of just keeping somebody alive in a prison for, 30 to 50 years. Okay. So that's a refutation. Well, wait a minute, let's talk about that cost. I think you're wrong about that cost. So in Smart Campus, you will find another handout that you can download, and this one is about refuting an opinion. These are the main ways to refute an opinion. Refutation means to negate, cancel, or deny something. It's used in debate to tell why the opposing team's point is either not true or not important. Okay? Either you're wrong, or maybe what you said is true, but so what? It's not enough to change my mind. Okay, those are the two strategies you can use. More specifically, you can refute a point by saying that it's not true or not always true. Or you can say it is not necessarily true, which means there might be some doubt about the supporting evidence. If a point is not important, it might be unimportant because it's not really connected to the resolution, it's not relevant, or it might be only a small difference, okay, therefore it's not significant, or it might be a problem that has a simple solution and it's easy to solve. All right, so you have two branches, not true or true but not important, and then you have, for not true, three types of not true that it could be. So if I say it's more expensive to pay the lawyers to get a death sentence, you could find me some statistics and show, no, that's not true. Here are the statistics. Okay? Or you might say that it's not always true. So sometimes it's true, but not every case. Okay? Or you might say that it's not necessarily true, or we're not sure if it's true. We're not totally sure. We need to look at the evidence more. And there is some doubt. Okay? And if you can just put doubt on somebody's point, on somebody's claim, often that's enough in a debate. So let's look at this handout. Okay, they give the example of cats and dogs, right? Cats are better pets than dogs. So cats are better pets than dogs because a cat costs $100 while the dog costs $105. Well, $5 is a very small amount of money. Okay, so is that not true or is that not important? Right? I think we can figure out which one of these it is. Okay, so I'd like you to go through this one and just answer each of these, figure out which of these what are these arguments doing, which method. Not true, not always true, not necessarily true, not relevant, not significant, or easy to solve. Which one of these does each of these ones make? Okay, which type of refutation does each one make? And after that, also practice making refutations. Okay, just do the activities on all 3 pages of this handout. Arguments, claims, counterarguments, refutations. We also looked at what a claim is, how you support a claim briefly, how those two things come together to be an argument, as well as giving definitions of a counterargument and a refutation. In this video, we're going to put those terms to work by actually looking at an example of an argument with counterarguments and refutations. And hopefully, as we examine one argument, we'll kind of get an idea or a good view of what arguments are, how to do them, and how ideas fit together in them. So let's take an argument. Here is a position that some people might believe, that some people might want to argue for in a presentation or an essay. The position that I've chosen is that all adults should be required to vote by law. There are actually quite a number of countries where voting is required by law. Some examples are Australia and Belgium. And it's an interesting idea. I've never lived in a country where you must vote, but there are places where you have to show up at the voting center for your neighborhood, or you have to actually cast a vote, or you will face some kind of penalty. And there are reasons for it. So let's look at some arguments that people might use to support the idea that all adults should be required to vote by law in a country. And the first argument is that voting is the lifeblood of a democracy. Voting is what it's all about. If you think about it, the main thing that makes democracy different from other types of government and other types of country is that the people have a voice. And the way that the people show their voice is by voting. If you take away the votes, it's not a democracy anymore. Okay? So, because voting is so important to democracy, maybe voting should be required for everybody. Okay? Now, there are a few refutations we can have for that. And the first one is, if you remember from the Refuting an Argument handout, you can say not true or you can say not important. Well, in one way, you could argue that this is not true. You could, and the way to do that is by attacking the logic. If somebody says everybody has to vote for it to be a democracy, that's the definition of a democracy, I would want to know the logic for that. What are the steps that go from voting is really important in democracy, or voting is what makes democracy unique? How do you get from there to therefore voting should be mandatory? And I don't know if it is. I think that those logical steps are hard to make. Okay? You can make them, but every step of logic on the way, there are also objections or problems with the logic. Okay? So that's one way to refute it, is to say, well, I don't follow the logical steps to go from voting is important in democracy to therefore everyone in a democracy should be required to vote. Okay, that is a refutation, because we're taking this idea that voting is important to democracy, okay, and we are questioning it. Okay, we're asking questions about it or challenging it. Okay, is that really true? Now, another way to respond to this argument is with a counterargument. So here, instead of just looking at the argument that one person made and questioning or challenging it, I'm going to actually make an argument of my own, something that is different, a different idea about, in this case, about democracy. So my counterargument is this: voting is not the lifeblood of democracy. Freedom is the lifeblood of democracy. The reason that democracies are special is because they give people freedom, and because the democracies and governments are designed to protect people's freedoms in a democracy. Voting is part of the process of democracy, but it's not the essential part. The process of democracy is we vote for leaders who choose how exactly to make sure that we have the freedoms democracy promises. Okay, so now we have two competing definitions of democracy. What makes democracy special? Is it the voting, or is it the freedom? And that's kind of a deep philosophical question that we could get very deep into in a long discussion. But here's another point connected to freedom as the lifeblood of democracy is, if freedom is so important, well, forcing people to vote, saying you must vote, you have no choice, restricts people's freedom. There might be some people in a democracy who don't want to vote. And should they have the freedom to say, I don't want to vote? Okay. That is a counter-argument, and it's an important one that we would have to think about in a debate about our mandatory voting. And in fact, in a few court cases, in a few of the countries where they had mandatory voting for a while, but then abolished it or overturned that law, a lot of the time it's because of this freedom argument, that saying that you have to vote restricts people's freedoms. And maybe true freedom is that even though I live in a democracy that gives me freedoms and protects freedoms, I can choose not to vote too. Here's my second argument for mandatory voting. Every adult benefits from government services, so it's fair that every adult also has duties like voting. Okay, so here, the freedoms of democracy come with responsibilities. And I think in most societies you would see that, right? The benefits that you get from being part of a church come with responsibilities of being part of a church. One example of that is that you have to follow the laws, right? The police protect us, but we also have to follow the laws to get the protection of the police, or else, well, they put us in jail instead. So now, instead of talking about freedom, instead of talking about the definition of democracy, we're talking about the relationship between benefits and obligations, duties and responsibilities, and privileges. Okay? And some people might argue that it's fair that people who benefit from, who go to the schools and who drive on the roads and whose freedoms are protected by the governments, that those people also have to do their duty to keep that government and keep that society running. Well, the refutation here is everyone already does have a duty that goes with the benefits of being part of a society, and that duty is paying taxes. Yes, I drive on the roads that my government builds, and I am protected by police that the government pays, and that's why I pay taxes, to pay for those roads and to pay those police officers, or pay for the firefighters or the schools where my kid goes. Okay, I've already filled my duty when I paid taxes. I might say that this is an attack on the relevance of voting, because those social services come from money, and taxing is money. So maybe voting has to belong to a different category. Voting isn't really directly related to the money of running a society, the way that paying for a school or building a road or paying firefighters to keep our neighborhood safe are connected to that money. Okay? So this one is arguing that sure, citizens have a duty, but that duty is in paying taxes, not necessarily in voting. The duty argument falls apart when you say, well, we do our duty, we pay the taxes. Okay? My third argument is, well, countries without mandatory voting sometimes have low turnout. Not a large percent of the population actually goes to vote. And the government gets less legitimacy because of this. Now, legitimacy just means, right, a legitimate leader is a leader who has the permission of the people, who has followed the rules so that everybody would agree that first, not just the leaders or elites like judges or police would agree, but everybody can kind of look at the process that we chose our leader and agree that it was a legitimate, it was a fair process. They followed the rules. It was done properly. Everything was right and correct. And in that correct, proper process, they were chosen as the leader. And legitimacy, that's one of the good things about democracy, and that's one of the good things about elections, is out of all the different ways of choosing a leader, elections have very high legitimacy. It's very hard to argue this person doesn't deserve to lead these people when the people chose them. Okay. Other countries where they don't elect their leaders, sometimes they have legitimacy problems. So in North Korea, if Kim Jong-un is having problems feeding his people, then people would say, what kind of a leader are you? You can't feed your people? We didn't choose you anyway. Where does your legitimacy come from? Why should we accept you? Why should we let you be our ruler when we didn't choose you and you're not doing the basic things that a leader should do? Right? And an unelected leader can face a legitimacy crisis like that. Legitimacy is important because that's how people consent, how people agree to be ruled. Without legitimacy, people would say, why should I let you be my leader or president or ruler? Maybe I want somebody else to be my leader instead. So that's my argument. Okay, countries with low voter turnout have less legitimacy in their leadership. Their leaders have less legitimacy because, there are times when somebody is elected president with only like 33 or 38 or 41% of the vote. And that 41% of the vote is only from 60% of people who actually went out and voted. So then you're in a situation where you can have somebody who only 20 or 30% of the people in their country voted for them, but they still became president. Is that person really the president of the people? It's hard to say, right? And that's the legitimacy problem of a low turnout election. Now, under mandatory voting, you'll have high legitimacy because everybody has to vote. My counterargument would be that under mandatory voting, some people might not take their vote seriously. And this also reduces the legitimacy of elections. And one example of this is there are some countries where sometimes a joke candidate ran for a political or an elected position, and there have been times when a joke candidate actually won. For example, there is a whole Wikipedia page with a list of animals that have been elected to office. If people don't take voting seriously, you also have legitimacy problems. And the fact is, if every person is required to vote, that will include some people who don't care about politics, who aren't interested in politics. And they might be choosing the person they vote for by who's the hottest, or whose name has the most letters, or just they might flip a coin in the ballot booth to choose who to vote for because they're not really interested and they don't care, and maybe they think that it doesn't affect them, but they have to vote or they'll have some penalty. Having a low voter turnout is not the only way for an election to lose legitimacy. And making everybody vote doesn't necessarily give more legitimacy, because there are a lot of other parts of the process of choosing a leader and electing them. And voting is only one of those steps in the process. So, for example, in Hong Kong, there have been some controversies because the Chinese government chose all of the candidates that were possible to vote for in the election. Well, is it really a free election if, yes, you're voting, but your only voting choices are people who were approved by the government in China, which has its own interests? So there are lots of ways to lose legitimacy in an election, and voter turnout is only one of them. So this might be not in every case, okay, not always the case, because there are other ways for an election to lose legitimacy, not just low voter turnout. So mandatory voting fixes one of the problems you might get, but not all of them. Another counterargument here. So in a successful debate, we need to prepare arguments. Now, the arguments that you've seen in this video lecture have mostly been kind of theoretical or logical ones. Please do not take that to mean that kind of theoretical or logical reasons are better than reasons based on evidence or examples. Okay? In fact, I would say that statistics and data are probably the strongest type of support if you can find it. It's harder to find. It's also sometimes harder to interpret, because sometimes the way that data was gathered changes what it means or how you can use it, and you need to understand a little about how it was gathered. However, good quality data used correctly is one of the most persuasive methods to convince, to support an argument for somebody who knows more about academic study and science. Logic is very strong as well, because you can think it out, right? You can think it through step by step, and somebody can show you the steps of their logic, and you can decide if you are satisfied with those steps, that they took the steps properly, or you can decide, no, those steps were not proper to me, they don't connect. Okay. After those, you have methods of persuasion that are less scientific, but they can still be very effective. And one of those is storytelling. So now we're looking at reasons, facts, and examples. Right? Storytelling is an example. Examples are risky when you're supporting an idea, because some examples are a unique, unusual case. So if something happened to my sister, and that's why I never ride bicycles, well, maybe that experience my sister had that I saw was very meaningful to me, but it might have been a very unique, unusual case. So it's hard for me to convince, the city hall government not to build bike trails because of something that happened to my sister. Data or statistics will work much better for policy or for scientists or for city developers. However, when I'm talking to my friend, if I can tell a heartbreaking story about my sister, if I can touch emotionally my audience, sometimes that can be very powerful. So remember that something that is logically or scientifically strong is not always powerful with an audience. And you have to look at your audience and think about your audience and know your audience to make those kinds of judgments. We will talk more about arguments, refutations, and counterarguments. I hope that this kind of walk through a debate has been helpful for you. And In class, we will be looking at ideas and different topics, and I will ask you to take a position. I'll ask you to support your position, and I will sometimes also ask you to argue a position you don't actually believe. Now, maybe you've noticed that in this video, I have basically argued through both sides of a debate. That is a really useful practice that I recommend to any of you when you are examining an idea. Look through not just the side that you have a feeling you kind of already agree with, but build the case for the other side too, to make sure that you fully understand the reasons that reasonable people believe that other position. Because there's always reasons. There are always reasons people believe their positions. And trying to build the case that they might make can help you to see that and understand it. It makes you a stronger thinker, and it will also, by looking so closely at your opponent's position, it will help you to find the weak spots in it. In this discussion, I've only gone 2 steps. I've gone argument and then counter-argument. Of course, a really good debate, a quality debate, would go further than that, because the counter-arguments I made and the refutations I made, well, there are ways to reply to some of those. So, for example, saying that voting is the lifeblood of democracy, well, the refutation or the counter-argument was, no, freedom is the lifeblood of democracy. Well, the next response might be, okay, that's true, but voting is the way that we make sure our leaders protect our freedoms. So it all comes back to voting. And the opponent might follow up from there and say, no, it all comes back to freedom. Voting is the way, one of the ways we exercise our freedom, but it's only one. And from there, both sides will get more into detail explaining what they think democracy is, what they think the importance of voting is, and what they think the meaning of freedom is. And hopefully that would be a useful conversation for both of them. Remember that a lot of debates and a lot of discussions don't have a final answer. But even if there isn't an absolute answer or a final answer, it's useful to go through these kinds of exercises to strengthen your mind. To be honest, a lot, maybe even most of the topics that we would bring into a debate class don't have a final answer. If they did have a final answer, we wouldn't be debating them. But these debates and conflicts are interesting, and there's always something new to explore. There's some new way of looking at it or some interesting perspective that we can gain when we open up our minds and when we become willing to have a debate and listen to new ideas. Debate is really important in a democracy. Never forget that. And be careful about people who distrust anyone who wants to debate, who tries to make you feel ashamed or embarrassed of wanting to debate things, of acting like it's a huge burden to explain their reasons for something, or somebody who tries to skip past debate by saying things like, oh, just trust me, I know a lot about this. A quality idea and a quality thinker can stand being questioned. And if a belief or a thinker is so brittle, so weak that they can't even handle being questioned, then it doesn't deserve your faith. It doesn't deserve your trust. It doesn't deserve your belief or your support. So always be careful of people who skip past logic, skip past support, and say things like, just trust me.